There is something that tends to happen when someone figures out they might be an INFJ. They read a description that says, intensely private, deeply introverted, needs solitude to recharge. And they nod. That part is true. But then they think about last Saturday when they stood in a crowd of 10,000 people at a concert, arms raised, completely lost in the music, feeling more alive than they had in weeks. And something doesn't quite add up. Or they think about how they turned down a party last weekend, genuinely, without hesitation, and then spent the next morning having what can only be described as a deeply nourishing 3-hour conversation with one person they trust. Laughing, opening up, not wanting it to end. These are not contradictions, but from the outside, they certainly look like them. And if you've ever tried to explain yourself to someone, tried to say, I'm an introvert, but I love concerts, or I need alone time, but I'm not antisocial, you may have watched their expression shift into something politely confused, like you'd said two things that simply don't belong in the same sentence. This video is about what's actually happening inside that experience. Not to defend it, not to explain it away, but to look at it carefully enough that it finally makes sense, even to you. Let's start with something specific. You're at a concert, a big one, the kind where you can feel the bass in your chest. There are thousands of people around you, close together, moving, singing words they all know. And you are fully there, not tolerating it, not enduring it in order to get to something better, actually there, in it, feeling something close to transcendence. Now hold that image for a moment. 2 days later, someone invites you to a birthday party. Maybe 40 people, a nice house, music at a comfortable volume, drinks, conversation in small clusters, and something in you contracts. You feel the pull toward a reason not to go. You know, even before you arrive, that you will spend most of the evening calculating when it would be acceptable to leave. From the outside, these two responses are baffling. You went to an event with 10,000 strangers and felt joy. You dread an event with 40 acquaintances. That doesn't sound like introversion. It doesn't sound like any single coherent thing. But here is what's different between those two situations. And this is the part that tends to get missed entirely. At the concert, no one needs anything from you. There is no social performance required. No one is waiting for you to ask about their job, to remember the name of their dog, to hold up your end of a reciprocal exchange. You are anonymous, absorbed. The crowd is not a social event. It is a collective sensory experience that you are having in private, inside yourself, while surrounded by other people who are also having it in private, inside themselves. The birthday party is different. At the birthday party, you are expected to be present to other people. Not just present in the room, but actively available, socially responsive, performing the small negotiations of conversation with people you may like perfectly well, but don't know deeply. The toll is not the number of people. The toll is the number of people who need something from you socially. That is not a contradiction. That is a highly consistent set of preferences that has simply been described with the wrong vocabulary. There is a second version of this that happens closer to home, quieter, less dramatic than a concert or a party, but in some ways more revealing. It is a Sunday afternoon. You have protected this time carefully. No plans, no obligations, no one expecting anything from you. The hours stretch out in a way that feels almost luxurious. And you settle into it. A book, a long walk, a project you've been turning over in your mind for weeks. You are alone, and the aloneness feels spacious rather than empty. This is the part people understand when they hear introvert. But here's the part they don't. Around hour 4 or 5, something shifts. The spaciousness starts to feel slightly hollow. Not painful, not loneliness exactly, but something closer to an absence you hadn't noticed until now. And you find yourself thinking about one specific person. Not people in general, not a desire to go out and socialize in any broad sense. One person whose company feels like an extension of quiet rather than a disruption of it. And if you could have that, an evening with that one person, unhurried, talking about things that actually matter, you would not experience it as draining at all. You would go to bed afterward feeling more full than when you woke up. This is the thing that is genuinely hard to explain, that solitude and deep connection are not opposites for you. They are both forms of restoration. What depletes you is not people. It is surface. Shallow conversation depletes you. Performing friendliness depletes you. Being in a room where you must be available to everyone and fully known by no one, that depletes you in a way that takes days to recover from. But a real conversation, one where something true gets said, where the other person goes somewhere unexpected and you follow them there, where you both come away having thought something you hadn't thought before. That does not cost you energy. It returns it. There is a third version worth naming, because it tends to produce the most self-doubt. You are with a group of people you genuinely like. Close friends, maybe. People you chose. The conversation is good. There is warmth in the room. And for a while, you are fully present, laughing, contributing, feeling connected in the way you sometimes worry you're not capable of feeling. And then, without warning, something closes. Not dramatically, not visibly. No one else would notice. But internally, something draws back, like a tide pulling away from the shore. And you are still in the room, still nodding and smiling, but you are no longer quite there. A part of you has already left. A part of you is very far away, and you don't always know why. It wasn't anything that was said. No one did anything wrong. You were fine, and then somewhere between one moment and the next, your capacity simply reached its edge. From the outside, this looks like disengagement, like boredom or aloofness, or a social switch being turned off without explanation. People who care about you may take it personally. You may take it personally. May spend the drive home wondering what is wrong with you, why you can't just stay present the way other people seem to. But what is happening is not a character flaw. It is a system reaching its limit in the most orderly way it knows how. The withdrawal is not rejection. It is protection of yourself and quietly of the people around you. Because you have learned that staying when you are no longer truly there produces something hollow that everyone can feel, even if no one names it. So what is actually happening inside all of this? What is the internal architecture that produces such a consistent pattern? Crowd at a concert, yes. Party with acquaintances, no. One trusted person, nourishing. Group of friendly strangers, costly. Present and warm, then quietly withdrawn, then needing 3 days of nothing before you feel like yourself again. To understand it, you have to look at what your nervous system and your cognitive style are actually doing in each of those situations. Because the difference is not about preference exactly. It runs deeper than that. When you are at that concert, your attention is directed outward and inward simultaneously, but in a particular way. Outward toward the music, the shared energy of the crowd, the momentum of the experience. Inward toward what that experience is producing in you. The feeling, the meaning, the way a particular lyric lands differently in a room full of people who are also feeling it. You are absorbing the collective without being responsible for it. You are receiving rather than managing. That is a crucial distinction. Receiving does not deplete you. Managing does. At the party, or in the group setting, something else is engaged. You are tracking people, not coldly, not deliberately, but automatically. You notice the person standing slightly outside the conversation circle. You register the shift in someone's tone that suggests they were lightly wounded by something said 5 minutes ago. You feel the unspoken tension between two people across the room. You are not choosing to do this. It simply happens. And it happens continuously, underneath the conversation you are also trying to have, underneath the socially competent surface you are also trying to maintain. That is not one cognitive task. That is several running in parallel. And the cost of running them is not trivial. What you are doing in social environments is sometimes described in psychology as heightened interpersonal sensitivity, a persistent, often automatic attunement to the emotional and relational states of others. Research on what Elaine Aron called the highly sensitive person, or HSP, describes nervous systems that process sensory and emotional information more deeply than average. Not more emotionally necessarily, but more thoroughly. More layers processed per unit of experience. Aron's work is careful to separate depth of processing from weakness or disorder. The system is not broken. It is calibrated finely. But fine calibration in a noisy environment is genuinely expensive. Not metaphorically, but neurologically. More processing means more recovery time required. Carl Jung, whose work laid the foundation for much of this, wrote that introversion was not about disliking people. It was about where psychic energy moves. For the introvert, engagement with the outer world draws energy inward toward exhaustion, while engagement with the inner world replenishes it. What Jung was pointing at was not shyness, not misanthropy, not social anxiety, though it can travel alongside those things. He was pointing at a directionality of energy that is fundamental to how certain people are organized. The concert works because the energy moves inward. The music, the crowd, the collective feeling, it all becomes material for your inner world to work with. You are fed by it precisely because you are not required to give anything back. The developmental psychologist Mary Ainsworth, known primarily for her work on attachment, offered something relevant here, even if she wasn't writing about introversion directly. Her research consistently found that the need for a secure base, a reliably safe point from which to venture out and to which one can return, is not a sign of dependency. It is a sign of a well-organized attachment system. The securely attached person is actually more capable of genuine exploration, genuine connection, genuine risk. For many INFJs, solitude functions as that secure base. It is not hiding, it is resourcing. The return to solitude after social engagement is not a retreat into dysfunction. It is the return to the place from which genuine connection becomes possible again. The person you are when you've had enough quiet is the person people most want to be around. You know this, even if you've been made to feel guilty for needing what produces it. There is a version of this pattern that gets labeled as contradictory, because we tend to think about introversion and extroversion as fixed points on a line, as if the question is simply how much social interaction a person can tolerate before needing to be alone. And by that model, the INFJ genuinely does not make sense. But that model is too simple. What you have is not an inconsistent relationship with people. You have a highly specific relationship with the conditions under which real connection becomes possible. You are not a person who doesn't like people. You are a person who is genuinely, sometimes overwhelmingly, oriented toward the depths of people, toward what they actually mean, what they're actually carrying, what is real beneath what they're presenting. Surface interaction does not satisfy that orientation. It frustrates it. You can feel the depth that is not being accessed and the gap between what the conversation is and what it could be creates a particular kind of fatigue that has nothing to do with the number of people in the room. This is not something to fix, but it is worth naming clearly because it tends to produce a specific form of self-doubt, the feeling that you are somehow socially broken, that you want connection but keep declining the forms it most often comes in, that your needs are too narrow or too difficult to meet. They are not too difficult. They are specific. And specific needs, once accurately understood, become navigable in a way that vague self-criticism never allows. So let's look at what this experience is not, because the mislabelings here are worth addressing directly. This is not social anxiety. Social anxiety is a fear response, anticipatory dread, a nervous system in threat mode around judgment or rejection. What you feel before a large surface-level social event is not fear. It is closer to a lack of motivation, a clear-eyed recognition that the energy expenditure is unlikely to be matched by what you will receive. That is not anxiety. That is an accurate cost-benefit assessment. The difference matters because treating an accurate appraisal as a disorder leads to solutions that don't fit the actual problem. This is not being antisocial. Antisocial, in both its colloquial and clinical meanings, refers to an orientation away from others, a low interest in people, a preference for isolation as a permanent state. What you are describing is nearly the opposite. The frustration of surface interaction comes from wanting more, not from wanting less. The withdrawal after a long social event comes from a system that engaged fully, not one that refused to engage. Antisocial people do not lie awake turning over a conversation they had, feeling the weight of what someone was carrying beneath what they said. This is not immaturity or unresolved issues with intimacy. Needing to know someone before opening fully to them is not emotional stunting. It is discernment. Many people open quickly and widely and find later that they extended more than the relationship could hold. What looks like caution from the outside is often an internal recognition of what depth actually requires, and a respect for that requirement rather than a fear of it. This is not inconsistency of character. The person who goes to the concert and comes alive in the crowd, and also spends Sunday morning alone with a book, is not two different people failing to cohere. That is one person with a complex, coherent inner life. One who has learned, perhaps slowly and at some cost, What conditions allow them to be most fully themselves? And this last point, tends to be the hardest one to settle into, because the world is fairly insistent on coherence of a particular kind. It wants you to be the introvert who stays home, or the extrovert who goes out. It is not quite sure what to do with someone who needs solitude the way other people need food, and also lights up completely in the presence of the right music, the right conversation, the right kind of shared silence. But that is not a problem you need to resolve. It is simply an accurate description of what you are. There is something worth sitting with before we close. The pattern we've been tracing, the careful management of conditions, the withdrawal when the system reaches its edge, the way depth and solitude function as two sides of the same restoration. This pattern is not a design flaw, but it does ask something of you that other configurations don't require quite as much. It asks you to trust your own readings of situations, even when they look inconsistent from the outside. It asks you to resist the pressure to explain yourself in terms that fit someone else's framework. And it asks you, perhaps most importantly, to stop treating your need for specific conditions as a sign that something is wrong with you, and to start treating it as information about how you are built. The concert was not a contradiction. The Sunday morning alone was not a contradiction. The 3-hour conversation with one person you trust was not a contradiction. They are all, in their different ways, the same thing. A person finding the conditions in which they can actually be present, fully present, not managing, not enduring, not calculating the exit, actually there. That is not a small thing. Most people spend considerable energy trying to find that feeling. You have learned, through attention to your own inner signals, where it lives for you. You don't need to become someone who is comfortable everywhere with everyone. That is not the goal. The goal, if there is one, is simply to understand the shape of your own experience clearly enough that you stop apologizing for it. Stop calling it contradiction. Stop offering it as evidence against yourself. The shape is not broken. It is just particular. And particular things, once understood, have a way of feeling less like problems and more like simply what is true. This channel exists for that kind of inner pace. No urgency, just understanding. A quiet place for deep minds.